Hi, I'm Jeff Walter, and welcome back to the podcast. I have a special guest today, Sean Morris. Sean is a seasoned restaurant industry leader with a rich legacy in hospitality and operations. He was raised in a family owned Carolina country barbecue, a beloved staple of the Carolinas. Sean honed his expertise managing its 5 location chain after college. He transitioned to the corporate sector, spent 2 decades there, climbing the ranks within major brands, including Tia's Tex-Mex, Buffalo's Southwest Cafe, Lone Star, Denny's, and Buffalo Wild Wings. His most recent corporate role was head of operations for a franchise group overseeing Buffalo Wild Wings and Denny's locations, managing a $60 million annual sales across 8 states. Now, Sean channels his deep industry knowledge and passion of barbecue into his own venture, Tickle My Ribs Barbecue, a franchise concept poised to bring bold flavors and exceptional dining experiences to communities nationwide. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I found really fascinating talking to you, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is, you have a pretty rich background with a lot of franchises and their training programs. And when you decided to do Tickle My Ribs, you took a very different path, and it's something we've seen occasionally in the industry where you're embedding the training into the operations rather than having being a separate thing you do outside the operations. And so I thought it'd be helpful we start, tell us a little bit about, I like to start with biography and kind of like how did you end up where you're at, kind of expand on the bio, what made you leave the family owned Country Carolina barbecue to go corporate, and then what motivated you to leave corporate to start your own thing, and along the way, and then we can transition into talking about the different training programs you've seen along the way, what you liked, didn't like, and why you chose this path going forward. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, so tell us a little bit about you, more than what I just read.
Yeah, I was say that was a great bio. Started out with my family business from the time I was, really born. It was a family ran, uncles, dad, grandparents, whole 9 yards. We were in it. Ran it, became very popular in North Carolina, and started became known. We opened up a couple more in Charlotte, and then we had one in Greenville and Spartanburg, South Carolina, and then one in Dallas,
Oh,
North
wow.
Carolina. Next thing you know, we're going, hey, this has got something. And then it started becoming so popular that even when presidents would come in to do their campaign, they would have to stop by Carolina Country Barbecue
Nice.
and see me eating the barbecue. So it was great. Did, like I said, all the way through college, and even spent 2 years after college in the restaurant helping run it. But as any young guy wants to do, he wanted to kind of venture out. I started meeting different corporate leaders at these different food shows.
Right.
They used to have really big, elaborate food shows. I started meeting, you start having conversations, and you meet them once, meet them twice. Next thing you know, one of the guys mentioned, hey, they had an opportunity in Texas. How exciting would that be? So next thing you know, I'm in Plano, Texas, helping open up a Tia's, and I got to work with some wonderful people. And they really showed me what I was missing when it came to P&Ls and different stuff. Because when you work in a family business, it's all cash flow. I mean,
Right.
it's straightforward cost, sales. What do you have left over for the family? So I got to really look at how to analyze multiple units, and I learned a lot. But I got to see a lot of stuff that I feel like there were a lot of gaps. I started noticing after about 5 years that we were doing some great stuff in the family business
Right.
that corporate was totally missing, and you could see these gaps, and they would appear in the operation. Then it started moving on, and then we did the Buffalo Southwest Cafe, and started working with Red Robin. Red Robin, I got to tell you, was one of my biggest eye openers as far as training. They were the publicly held, the quintessential, large brand
Right.
that's got all the corporate backing. It's got the backup from the market share, so they're always funded. And they probably had the most robust training program that I saw of all of them. Even with Buffalo Wild Wings and Denny's, they had some training material. I mean, you could tell they put a lot of money in the material, but the actual thought process, philosophy, and everything was more. I saw more out of Red Robin than I did any of them.
Okay.
But once again, there were a lot of gaps. And as I started to progress, and even went with a group called Tex-Mex, there was a stage there for about 5 to 6 years when I was technically corporate, but it was private equity. And
Okay.
private equity, still corporate, they still trying to maintain stuff, but it's a little different environment, and the overall goals are a little different than
Right.
when you're a publicly held company. So after that, I noticed that there were some. I went to RJC and I was running a franchise group. Once again, different motivations, different programs, but really had to follow some strict guidelines and training programs. But the gaps were growing even more there.
And
I really noticed.
what kind of gaps are you talking about when you say?
So, like, you would have a training program, but it would never actually make it operation. And I started, and I guess when I was in the family business, everything we did had a direct purpose, a direct link, and there was a direct outcome
Okay.
because there was no time for nonsense, right?
Right.
The training programs, some of the programs I would notice, even from the Ruby Tuesday type TIAs and the Red Robins and stuff, there was a gap between training and ops. And they almost had to put a mechanic in between the two. So now you had a third arm to bridge the training program and the ops.
What do you
And
mean by mechanic? That's an interesting
like
choice of
like
word.
like there had to be a way to translate it. It's like there was always a gap between what training believed and what ops believed.
Okay.
And then you go talk to the training people, and they've never actually worked in one of the restaurants that they're training for.
Right.
And you're here and you're going, well, there's the gap. You don't even know. And the same thing goes for culinary. I mean,
Right.
sometimes you get culinary, and I can't tell you how many times a chef and I've had a vigorous conversation
Yeah.
about what they're trying to do as opposed to the possibility of executing it in operations. And
Right.
the gap. So what I noticed, especially whenever I was doing the franchising and leading, at one point we had 48 restaurants over 7 states. We had different cultures, different personalities, different dynamics in the stores and everything. And then, but you only had one training program. And when you're dealing with FTDs, you have to adhere to those training programs.
Right.
And that's where I think we had to almost create a third mechanic in our operation to translate what was coming from the franchisor to the actual store.
Right.
So while the FTD had their own, the franchisor had their own training department, as a franchisee, we were almost having to create a group in our group to help translate the training from the franchisor to the franchise to our units
Yeah.
because the material would roll out, but you're assuming that everybody's at the same level of education. You're assuming that everybody's at the same experience level of the restaurant. So
Hmm.
therefore, everybody's going to understand everything that's coming out. Sometimes you get a manual, like a simple milkshake rollout would be a manual this thick, and you're going to make a strawberry milkshake. I needed a manual this thick. There were just so many different gaps between operations and training. And I started developing a mindset. I started taking back what I learned with my family,
Uh-huh.
and then I took what I had from there. Then I started combining what I learned from corporate as far as structure, the consistency, the redundancy. But then I took the family side and said, you've got to have a direct line of anything that you do or anything that you lay out on paper. There needs to be a direct line to the operational outcome.
Yeah. What?
And I don't think we're there, especially in corporate. I think it was more, hey, we're the training department. We came up with this really pretty nice flyer and manual
Right.
that talks about, and it usually will even go into, what's your leadership mentality? What's this mentality? What's this? And, the latest buzzwords of the day, good to great, low hanging fruit, all the buzzwords that we can throw into a
Yeah.
manual.
Hey,
And,
I was in
but
consulting for many, many decades. I'm very familiar with buzzwords. It's like,
yeah,
let's make some stuff up to explain something.
yes, yeah. And it's like, we're going to make a new graph, a new picture, a new artwork, a new something to say, hey, this is how we're going to train. But none of it was actually making it to the how do I have this great new book that's supposed to just really transform operation and it's never actually making it to operation. It's great in our boardrooms.
Right.
It's great when we're talking about it. And it's great whenever the person's putting on a PowerPoint presentation and like, we're going to have our people do this and they're going to look at it this way. And, and it's always this all great big training program and we're going to do this. But then you go to the restaurants 3 months, 6 months, a year later, how much of that actually made it
Uh,
to the operation? And we spend so much money and energy and time on these rollouts of this stuff. And I just started noticing, and after a while, I'm not sure I became a skeptic,
right.
but I really started to ask a lot of questions when people would present these programs to me. And I started noticing that I was the only guy in the room really drilling down on, okay, well, what's the ROI on this?
Yeah.
If I buy 27 manuals, I send out 42 plane tickets, 500 hotel stays, days worth of hotel stays,
Right.
and do all this stuff. What's the return on this investment that I'm going to see?
Okay.
If my top line sales are X
Right.
and my bottom line numbers are X,
Right.
and I've invested this amount of money, which one of these numbers are going to move? And what's my expectation of movement? And I think I think that's a fair question when you're asking about a training program.
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. Yeah, I've been fortunate to have a number of clients that look at it that way. But the sad thing, I think, in the industry is that's not the norm. Is, if I'm going to
Right.
spend $1 on training, how do I get $2 return? Either an additional top dollar, top line revenue, or increase the margins, or because I'm decreasing some type of expense somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, I was just raised as a consultant. This is like, spend a buck, you got to figure out, you got to tell them how you're going to save them $2 or generate $2, right? So I,
100%.
so really interesting. If we look at what you guys are doing and the Carolina country barbecue, that's really interesting. That I've always thought of it on the franchise side as there's really kind of two use cases, if you would, right? I'm opening up a new location. And so how do I get that location spun up to speed and ready to go day one, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
franchise, I got a new franchisor, and how do I get that guy spun up to speed in day one? And then there's the ongoing thing of like 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. I'm hiring people because there's turnover and into the restaurant. And how do I bring them up to speed? Could you, it's interesting with Carolina Country Barbecue and some of the corporate ventures that you were in. How would you like? Let's start with like opening up a new store, because you mentioned earlier that Carolina Country Barbecue started taking off like hotcakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you look back at it now with the knowledge and experience you had, you're a young man then. You're still a young man, but you're a younger man then, and
Yeah.
and
Whew.
and at the time it may not have registered, but now with the experience, you can kind of look back. Like when Carolina Country Barbecue was opening up a new store versus say Denny's or Tia's or one of the corporate
Mhm.
franchisors you worked for. How did those different training programs, kind of, how are they different?
Right.
Because I think that's
Well,
at the root of what you're talking about, right?
it is. Well, openings was my first. That was my first aha. I'm like, holy crap! How many people does it take to open up a restaurant? My first corporate opening, they had 125. They wouldn't open a restaurant without 125 people on schedule. And I'm going,
What does that mean?
wait a
When you
minute,
say like at the location or like corporate support?
hourly, yeah, at a location, a location, and some of the franchises actually have that in their FTDs when they open with their programs and stuff about how many people you have to have on staff before you're allowed to actually open a restaurant.
Okay.
And it's unless you're running a very small fast casual, I mean, it's in the
Huh.
hundreds. And just imagine that. Imagine saying to an owner, I don't want to get too off on the tangent, but I always found it
Huh.
crazy. So you're telling me to open up a restaurant that you're currently operating right now with around 35 to 40 people on staff.
Right.
You're running a $3 million location with 40 people.
Okay.
To open up my store, you want me to pay 125 people to be on staff
Huh.
to open up. And you're going to give me so-called the training team, which is usually consists of two back of the house, two front, two managers, and some regional director. I mean, that's kind of the staff and the way that it's all set up. And there's this big thing, and they come in and they take over your building and they take
Right.
control of your 100 and something person staff and with the 10 extra people, and they're going to run this thing for 2 straight weeks, and we're going to have the best opening. And it's like the worst experience. It's the slowest ticket times. I mean, you listen to people all around the country. I'm not going to go to that restaurant while it's open because I'm going to let them work the kinks out.
Right.
I mean, how many times have you said, "Oh, that place just opened. I'm not going there for a couple months until." But when we opened up Carolina Country Barbecue, me, my dad, my two uncles, a new staff, a server, and a cook that came from the other restaurant.
Okay.
And we opened up with a normal staff. I did create a little thing called the captain method that really worked for us when we opened up the Dallas store and all that. But the the method was I would just use one trainer and they would stand and convision. Now you got to remember these restaurants were no alcohol
Right.
and but 300-seat restaurants. I mean, they were the
That's
big
big. It's big.
old school restaurants, right? People were lined out the door. I mean, this was during the time, so we'd be lined out the door from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m.
That's a beautiful thing.
And oh, it was wonderful, wonderful. And it was just packed. But we would have an experienced server stand in the middle and just watch 5 or 7 tables, and they were doing handwritten tickets. And I'm like, hey man, we're gonna have to get computer systems in here. And I helped computerize Carolina Country Barbecue because you got to remember this was in
Right.
1995. Um, so we were just now getting into POSs. We were still using PLU numbers,
Hmm.
and we were able to run 400, a 400 or 300-seat restaurant, 400 people coming and going within every 50 minutes, and we ran it fine with handheld tickets. We computerized it, and all of a sudden everything becomes, crazy. So I go to these restaurants and I watch these big corporate openings and I watch these disasters happen.
Why do you think, like,
It,
I'm really curious, like, you take a restaurant that you said needed like 30, 40 people, it's a $3 million a year location, needs like 30, 40 people to operate normally. I'm assuming that's bodies, not full-time FTEs. You had a lot of
right.
part-timers. Why would you need like 3 times that number? Like, I don't like, what was the
It's
rationale to that?
well, I've sat in these meetings and we start hearing stuff. Well, you're gonna have a high turnover. You're gonna have
Okay.
people not show up. You're gonna have people quit after the first day. I get it, but nobody's asking the question. Well, why do you have the high turnover during the openings?
Right.
Because it's the most money the servers are ever going to make. It's the most hours that a kitchen guy's ever going to get.
Right.
So why would they be quitting during the openings? And the reason is because it's so hectic that it almost weeds out people that just want to work in a normal restaurant environment.
Right.
It becomes a nightmare, and it shouldn't be that way because. And here was an argument. This was an actual argument I had, and I don't want to tell what franchise group it was, but
Yeah.
me and the director of
Huh.
training stood in a parking lot, and I said, "So you guys, we just ran this restaurant, and you guys had 2 people per position
Right.
throughout the day. I had your so-called best people come in and help open my restaurant.
Right.
We ran 30-minute checks. We had guests walk out.
Right.
We had servers crying. We had cooks. And you guys are claiming that you've opened up 100 of these restaurants. Why is it so hectic? I don't understand."
Okay.
Right. And I'm like, where's the gap? I don't understand why we're having such a hard time opening up what I consider we're operating 20 of these over here and we have no problem and we're running similar sales.
Right.
But when I have the most people, I mean, when you say this out loud, you as a consultant, if I say this out loud, what would you say? If I was in a board meeting, I go, so let me get this straight. We've got 20 restaurants that are running pretty smooth, headache free. They're burying money in the bottom line. we're going to open up a new restaurant. We're going to put the most people, the most talent, the most leaders, and give it the most attention than it's ever going to have in its entire
Right.
existence. And it's going to run the worst it's ever going to
Huh.
run from now until. If I said that out loud to anybody, they would say, well, don't do it.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine the rationale would be something like, well, it's a new operation. It's going to be inefficient. People have to go up to speed. And that's why it's going to have, terrible ticket numbers. And, like that's why it's going to be poor because,
But we got to ask ourselves why, though.
right.
I mean,
Okay.
so
So let's
so
go.
so
I'm
the
sorry. Let's go. If I think what I heard you say is okay. So from a typical corporate opening would be you hire two or three, twice as many people as you need because you,
at least three. They usually
or
do
three
three.
X, right? Because you train them all, right? Because you got to train everybody, including the managers and assistant managers. Corporate comes and you bring in the you got the two guys. I think you said typical would be two guys in the back, two guys in the front, experts to help the operation, and
Mhm.
and at launch, and they're there for a couple of weeks. Everybody's trained based on the protocol. They have a rough going for a few weeks. Corporate leaves, store managers left there. They figure it out. They get the turnover because I got to imagine some of that turnover is nobody's getting the hours they need, right? Like if you got three times the people you need, you're not getting the hours you want, right?
Well, actually, the first 2 weeks, everybody's scheduled at max hours all the time. I mean, it is a big money suck. It's probably one of the most expensive parts of opening a store.
Okay, so now let's compare that, and then you kind of briefly hit on Carolina country
Selling country.
barbecue, right? And it seemed like a very different approach because you rattled off a couple of people, your uncles, your father, a couple of other folks. It's almost seems like a very different. Well, it's a very different approach. If I look at it from a training perspective, it's almost like you seeded the new location with a bunch of experienced experts. And
Hmm.
then, how long would you guys be at the new location? It was a team of like 5 or 6 people. When you mentioned it,
Right.
like how long would you be
Yeah. Well,
there?
we would stay there for almost a
For
month.
about a month. Okay.
A
And
month.
then, let's just say it's a 40-person restaurant, the kind of one that, I mean, I know your restaurants were bigger, but kind of do apples to apples.
Yeah.
Are you hiring 150% of what you need, 200%, 300%, like the corporate or,
It was usually one and a half what we need, 150%.
okay. So a little bit more.
And then of course that would be availability depending.
Right.
And I even did this in corporate though. We would write a
Uh
schedule.
huh.
We would literally write a schedule and say this would be the optimal schedule with, and they were just called employee 1 through
Right.
40,
Right.
right? And then we'd write the optimal schedule, and then we'd hire to that
Okay.
schedule. Like I would look and I would show a new person, and I said this one time at a board meeting. They thought I was crazy. I go write the optimal schedule, put that in the hiring trailer, and then when you hire someone, go which one of these schedules is your best schedule? All right, your name's here. This is your
Right.
schedule. And next thing you know, you start filling it out. But we don't do that in corporate, right? We just hire people. So that's how we do Carolina Kitchen Barbecue. We would actually make a schedule. We would hire for that, and then we'd hire the backup for 50% of that
And
schedule.
did the backup, that extra 50%, did they know they were the backup because they were not on the schedule?
Yeah, yeah, they would know they were the fill-ins, the part-time fill-ins. Because
Okay.
and what I say by
Yeah.
backup is what I
Yeah.
mean is if I had you work from 10 till 2 and that was doubles were huge back then, and then you'd work from 4 to
Right.
10 as my double, you're a backup. You would come in and do my gap,
Right.
right? You would be my 2 to 6,
Right.
right? You were my 2 to 6 person. So you had the transition because this was before computers too. So you had to clean your own tables, you had to do
Right.
everything, you had to do your own prep and side work. So there was a transition in the shifts that would take place. So you would have to have those fill-ins at 50%. Those were your 25 to 30 hour
Right. But
workers.
well, the interesting thing is, and they knew that that was their role, right? So like
Yes.
I mean, we're kind of off topic on training, but it's kind of an interesting approach. One
Yeah.
is let's hire 300%. Nobody knows exactly what their long role
They're
is
going to
or how
work.
many hours they're going to get or anything like that. But let's
Yeah.
train them all. Let's get a couple of experts there for a few weeks. and then let's double up the let's double up the shit, let's have double the staff as we're going, and then you have the
Hmm.
some turnover for a variety of different reasons, versus let's get a nucleus of experienced people, to run the place, right?
Yes.
As opposed to oversee. If you look at the two in the back, two in the front, you were talking about, they're there to guide, not to run and to train. When you guys are doing Carolina Country, it's a nucleus to actually launch the thing. We're going to be here for a month, still hiring more people than you need, but this person knows that this is what they're being hired into, and they're getting these number of hours down the line. And then that extra 50%, because you're going to have people drop out and all the other things we talked about, but it's not a
Hmm.
3x. You don't need three times the people. You need a 50% more, but the 50% know they're the 50%, right? And so
Right.
because a lot of times, like, when it comes to turnover and retention, like when we're at the show, I was talking to folks about retention, and it was interesting. They said one of the top reasons people leave a franchise location in the first 30 days is they weren't trained. And one of the
Right.
major reasons they leave within the first year is they realize nobody else is trained. And I thought that was a really interesting fact that came from that survey.
Yeah.
And so I'm like sitting there going, but it's the missed expectations, right? And so it's really interesting. So then how did you train those 150%? Like how did they get trained versus how the
We,
300% got trained?
we did shoulder to shoulder
Okay.
training. Like there were no books, there were no manuals, there were no, all this stuff. Now we had our little
Right.
sheets, and this was back, remember when you had to go to a printer and print. We had our little sheets and we laminated them, we'd stick them in different places, and it would show like how to cut lemons, how to do this. And then we had a recipe
Right.
guide. And no one did hands on without someone with them the first time.
Okay.
It's a
Right.
rule. Have you ever cut lemons? I mean, I know lemons is probably very simple, but it gets us down to the root. Have you ever cut lemons here before? No. Well, come on, let's go cut
Right.
lemons and let's do it together because we have to do it every morning,
Right.
right? And this was back whenever everybody only drank tea, so we were
Sweet
going
tea. Yeah.
through 5 cases. Yeah, we're going through 5 cases of lemons a day. So showing them how to cut lemons, and they go, "Hey, you got it? You got it? All right, great. You're signed off on this. For now on, you're my lemon person,
Right.
And we would go do this, and who made beans, who made sauce, who made this. And we were shoulder to shoulder with these guys for a month.
Right.
No manuals, no big books. You had a recipe book and you had small little things that kind of showed where stuff went and everything. And we just pumped the
Yeah.
food out. And there was no anxiety when we opened up. There was no freak out. There was no, oh my God, no one showed me this. There was none of that. And there was no rush to train because we weren't trying to consolidate it in a matter of 10 days worth of training because that's what we're calling. We were there for a month. We're like, let's everybody
Yeah.
relax. Let's everybody get to know this stuff. But if you do this stuff, by the third week, we were almost sitting back and these guys were pumping out food. That third week transition with us just supervising, oh, hold on, remember, we got to
Right.
grab this.
Right.
Hey, let's do this. Hey, I'm going to go watch the door. All of a sudden, they're starting to become a jail. By the fourth week, man, you guys have got this. We're out. We're going off to our
Huh.
next thing. We'll be checking on you. And it was great. It was great. But I don't know who wrote the rule, but I'd like to find them one day but someone said, hey, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's all you get. Franchising group, we give you
Yeah.
2 weeks, 10 days. I said, so I find it ironic that the training programs like the Buffaloes, the Denny's, the Red Robins, all them, they write to be a cook. Some of these training programs are 10 days, and to be a specialist, an actual certified person, can take 15 days. But when you open up a restaurant, you give them 2 weeks of support.
Hey, let me ask you. I mean, it's really interesting. If we stick with the lemons for a second, my trivial
Yeah.
example, because I'm listening to what you said about Carolina, and it was a lot of on-the-job training with that nucleus of skilled, experienced people that knew how to do the job. And it wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
on-the-job training, figure it out for yourself. It was on-the-job training, and you're basically doing skill development, and saying, okay, here are the 10 skills you need to be whatever the role is, or here's the
Mm-hmm.
15 done cutting lemons, which sounds trivial, but you got to cut them. You got to cut them right. They got to be consistent. And, if you've never done it before, you don't know what to do. Right.
Right. Right.
And so if we take, if I'm listening to what you're saying on the Carolina barbecue and I'm like, oh, okay, it's on the job training with a mentor, with practice, with coaching. And then once you reach a certain level of proficiency in the skill, you are free. You have now earned the right to do it on your own. Right. And now let's just take the lemon cutting thing for a second. So we understand how that happened at Carolina. So the guy that has to, or gal that has to cut the lemons at one of the corporate sites that we're talking about, how did they learn to cut lemons?
So usually at a opening, you would have 3 kids there getting ready to learn how to cut lemons, a trainer right here explaining how to do it. They cut it one time and they leave. And then these guys sit there and massively cut lemons and they do it over and over and over, but it's done like in a
Right.
classroom setting.
Okay. And then so we're going to have a
And
lemon cutting class. Might only last 15 minutes,
right.
but we're gonna teach you how to cut lemons. You cut it this way, that way, the other way, and
Mm-hmm.
I've conveyed the knowledge to you of how to cut lemons. I haven't observed your proficiency
Right.
at the skill of cutting lemons, and I'm not
Right.
signing off that those 3 guys that were I just taught how to cut lemons, that they can do it to a certain level of proficiency and quality that we expect
Mm-hmm.
from our lemons here, right? So it's
Right.
interesting because I'm thinking about like that's like more of like a knowledge acquisition thing. It's like I'll show you how to cut them. You know in your head how to cut them. You may not know how to cut, but you may not be able to cut them properly. Versus
Right.
I've got a mentor and a coach. I'm going to cut lemons with you for 3 days if it takes 3 days until you're
Right.
proficient at the skill. And then I'm going to say, oh, okay, you know how to cut lemons. You can cut the lemon. You're my
Right.
lemon gal, or you're my lemon guy. For so it's interesting.
But if you had 300 people or 120
Yeah.
people, there's no way that someone's going to sit there with 120 different people and cut lemons, and train them that way. But if you have a schedule and you know who all your openers
Right.
are, and that's when you cut lemons, you sit down with the openers,
Oh,
and
that's
every day
interesting.
during the
That's
shifts,
another interesting take on it that I hadn't thought of. So because you had the schedule, not every response, you know, it's not a server is a server is a server and a cook is a cook is a cook. It's,
right?
well, if you're the opening server or the opening cook or the opening busboy or the mid
Yes,
or the closing, there's a different set of job responsibilities as to what yeah, and skills and things you need to do if you're in opening or if you're closing or if you're midway through the day. And therefore you could sit there and go,
yes,
not only did you have half the number of people to train because you didn't do 300%, you did 150%, right? So you're already down to half the number of people to train. But then
right.
you differentiated and said, well, I know who the openers are, and here are the skills that an opener needs. And so I'm just going to teach the openers the skill, and I'm not going to train necessarily the other people because they're closers or they're my mid afternoon people or they're my swing shift or whatever. And but then my closers, there's something there's things you got to do when you close the restaurant at the end of the day, and same
Hmm.
type, another set of skills, and I don't need to teach my openers that because they'll never use that skill, right? And so we're
But right now in corporate, they try to train every team member on every skill set in 2 weeks.
interesting. So it's so
And then they wonder why it flops. And I'm going, because they're trying to train the entire operation, opening, closing, mid, transition, floor cleaning, this and
right,
that and this, to every team member.
right. So that's really interesting because then break it further segregates it, and you're in that startup where you're trying to get maximum. You're trying to make sure that you have all the skills you need to successfully open this up. And what you guys did at Carolina was sit there and go, well, it's not a server is a server is a server. An opening server has a different set of responsibilities than a closing server, than a transition server. I'm going to teach because you had that schedule, everybody knew.
Hmm.
I'm going to teach, and then over time, which kind of transitioning to the
Right.
next thing, which like, okay, now you've opened, there's the opening and then there's the overtime, right? Well, over time,
Right.
that opening server can learn the skills of the closing server and the transition server and vice versa. But I don't need that to open and have a successful opening. And then over time,
Right.
that closing server can sit there and go, okay, Sean, how do or not? Or actually, you guys have gone, to the assistant manager, whomever. Okay, show me how to cut lemons. Okay, now I know how to cut lemons, and they go, okay, you now know how to cut lemons properly for the way we do lemons here, and you that plus these other skills, you now are qualified to be an opening server, right? So you can start picking up
Right.
opening server shifts as they become available, or maybe your life has changed and you no longer want to work closing, you want to work opening. That's very interesting versus the teach everybody everything to start because nobody knows
Right.
where they're going to be on the schedule, and that's interesting. That's interesting.
When I had an opening where I pretty much stepped in, and short of kicking the corporate team
Mhm.
out, and I almost went back to my roots, and I said, "Stop! This thing is tipped over." I was in the kitchen, 6 guys working 5 fryers. Get your mind around that. How do I have 6 people working 5 fryers? That doesn't even compute. So you have 2 guys standing there watching and 3 guys trying to do all the stuff. And I'm like, oh, stop. Hey, man, hey, here's how this works. This is your fryer. We're going to do tenders in this fryer.
Right,
You want tenders. When they call fries, you want fries. So I went back to my roots of micro
right,
jobs. And the term that we're dancing around, though, that the corporate people call it, is called, well, you were talking about, like, hey, once you've learned this skill, and then over time, you'll develop more skills. Corporate quantified it as
right,
cross
right,
training. And I laugh at cross training because it's so not how that works. It's you let them learn the most basic skill first, and over time allow that skill set. Because even though you know how to cut lemons, I know we keep going back to lemons, but it's a great
right.
small thing. You've got to be fast
Yeah,
at it
yeah,
too. It can't just be I know how to cut them. I'm going to get proficient at cutting them in a certain amount of time because I can't spend 5 hours cutting lemons going, look, this is the best lemon ever. I just, yeah, look, you've got to be able to cut them in a timely fashion and be able to open the restaurant and still make your tea, still set up your table, still clean
right,
everything up, still vacuum the floors, still, you got to do a lot of stuff. So, but the lemon thing is just a good example of you've got to do it with them. You got to show them how fast you got to do it. You got to work with them for a week and see that they're fast enough to do it to where you can go, hey, now you are the opening
right,
lemon guy because you're going to knock out lemons in 15 minutes and roll into the next job of
right,
setting up tables. That's how the training starts to
right,
work. But just because you showed 12 people in a classroom setting how to cut lemons and said, all right, you guys now know how to do lemons, let's go do the other stuff, doesn't mean they're
right,
proficient at it. It just means that you dropped a little nugget of knowledge on them how to cut. And the same thing goes in, it rolls in the kitchen. Hey guys, I'm going to show you how to plate this food. Now that you know how to do it, remember this forever. And also, I want you to remember this one plating with the other 5 other platings I'm going to show you, and the 10 other things I'm going to show
yeah,
you today. And then when you don't understand, I'm gonna go, I don't understand why you don't get this. And I'm like, because you just tidal wave them with the information and they absorbed about that
right.
much. They're
Well,
not
and
proficient.
and you, it's interesting because the way I look at it from the our roadmap of stage one self and then stage two knowledge acquisition, stage three skill development, and it's like I'm like Carolina Country Barbecue is doing skill development, which you have to acquire knowledge, but then you also have to
Mhm.
practice and be coached, and then you hit a certain level of proficiency and quality. And now you have that skill. A lot of corporate
Mhm.
training programs, and it's one of the things I'm really excited about AI. But historically, it's been more knowledge acquisition. Here's how you lemons. Here's
Mhm.
how you plate this. Here's how you do that. Whether or not you have the skill to do that was not part of the program, right? You'd have to get that over time.
Well, that's part of my problem with some of the training programs. The training programs are about a information dump and not a skill
Right.
training program. It's a big difference. And I think I used this example at the thing when we were talking. Is if me and you sit in a classroom and I give you this little book and this is how to
Right.
swim, right? Let's read this. All right, man, you've gone through all 4 chapters of how to swim. You understand the mechanics, you understand the philosophy of swimming. I throw you on the boat. We go in the middle of the ocean. I toss you in and say, hey man, I told you how to swim.
Right.
Swim. How do you think this is going to work out? I mean, that to me is what an opening feels like. I gave you a book on how to swim and tossed you in the middle of
Yeah.
the Atlantic Ocean and said, go at it. I gave you all you needed to do. And so there's a gap there on operational and information dump. And just kind of segueing in is that's where when I started to break away from corporate again, I go, you know what? I'm sick of all the stuff that and FDDs have gotten into it, and their federal requirements. You got to have a manual for
Right.
this, got to have a manual for
Right.
that, in order to say you have something proprietary. And I go, no. You know what I need? I need something that
Yeah.
works. If I was a franchisee and you gave me a book because the federal government said, hey, in order to be a franchise, you have to have this book, and you give me this book, but if my restaurants fail, well, let me tell you what you can do with that book. What I want you to do is come and tell me, hey, are you a group that's going to teach me how to run my restaurants? You're going to make sure my guys have a skill set so that we succeed in our openings, we succeed in our operations. And that is skill development. That's where we have to get away from this information dump. And I loved your term, bake it in the
Right.
cake. The training has to be baked into the skills that we are practicing, not just in information overload. I want the skill development to be the training program.
So now, transitioning over to Tickle My Barbecue, or Tickle My Ribs Barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Tickle,
Tickle
Tickle
my
My
ribs.
Ribs.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's right.
so now so now let's look at Tickle My Ribs, and let's look at an opening there, and how you've embedded the training into the operations to do the skill development. So why don't you take us through, we've kind of compared and contrast those things from your past. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds to me now that the Carolina Country Barbecue and how that went, it's like, now I understand what you're doing with Tickle My Ribs. Or where, it's like almost
Mm-hmm.
like you're taking a lot of the concepts that were back there in the 90s when you were starting out, but you're kind of bringing them into a more modern context where you have all the technology to do things that you had to do shoulder to shoulder back then, right? So why? So
All right.
let's transition to Tickle My Ribs, and what does an opening look like there? How do you train people to make sure that a new store location is successful? And take us through what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and how you've embedded the training into
Well,
the operations.
well, the pre-work is I utilize my POS system, and I think we underutilize so many different POS systems. And I don't want to promote any POS system over another, but these things are walking information systems,
Right.
right? I mean, and all we do is use them like cash
Okay.
registers, but they have all this information. You have a spot where what the guests can see, what goes on the ticket, and then what goes on the chit, CHIT. That's the term in restaurant for what goes
Right.
back into the kitchen. And I'm like, we underutilize this stuff so much. So I sat down and we changed the chit part of all of the menu items when they get rang in. So when it prints out, I actually have the ounce and the placement in order on when it prints out. So I'll just give an example. It says pork plate, fries, coleslaw, right? When it prints out, it says pork 6 ounces, coleslaw 5 ounces, fries 6 ounces, and that's the order it goes on the plate, and it goes from 6 to 11, 6 to 11. Everything is on that because the plate's round, so you do it like a,
Right.
a, a
Right.
clock face, right? Protein's always at 6, starch is at 3, 11 or 2, however you want to do it, and the bread is always at 12. Restaurant industry. So you stick with the restaurant industry standard stuff, build your plate accordingly. So when it prints out, it's almost like the reminder of where everything goes to your kitchen help. The stuff that you showed them as you were working beside them as stuff was printing out, it just gets reiterated with check after check after check. So we've got the redundancy part. They're actually hands-on doing it. So they got the skill set part. And then we're able to review it when we look at the check and things. So it's the show, tell, review all in one program. Hey, I'm going to show you guys how to do it when the check comes out. Look at this. Got it. All right. Now you do it. Got it. All right. Here comes another check. Do it again. Here's another check. Do it again. Man, I'm telling you, within 3 days, they've got the plating memorized, and they don't have to guess with the amount of product.
So
It's on the check.
what would a
It's
typical I'm not I've never worked back a restaurant, never worked. What would a typical chit
Mhm.
look like? Like I just like
Uh, it would just it's a lot of times they try to use a code. It cracks me up. I'm like, they don't even print out the whole word. Sometimes it'll be like COTWY, and then we actually have a decipher key in some of these restaurants, and they go, okay, guys, this stands for this. So not only does the kitchen guy have to
right.
memorize the menu, he also has to memorize the abbreviations, which is just another learning.
So in your example, a typical restaurant, the chit would say some code that means the plate, or it would say the pork plate,
Yeah,
right? And then
yeah,
I,
yeah,
the cook, would have to know. Oh, that's 6 ounces of shredded pork. That's 5 ounces of coleslaw. That's a biscuit and green beans or whatever it is, whatever the plate
yeah.
is, and it's arranged in this way, right? Versus
Right,
what you did with the POS is you expanded that so that no, it tells you exactly how many ounces of pork, coleslaw, green beans, and where on the plate to put it. And then what I thought was really
right.
fascinating. And therefore, if you ever change that, like, oh, the pork plate does not include green beans anymore. We're putting collard greens um,
Right,
there.
right.
So how, if you were at a,
I just changed it on the POS system and downloaded it out
and
on the
as
stores.
opposed to what would that look like in a corporate, in some of the corporate without, we don't have to name names, but what would that look like at one of the corporate
Yeah.
things?
Oh my God, man. They would call it a menu rollout, menu update. They would send out all this material to the stores. They would do some verification tour where they'd send some director to go and see if everybody got the download, if everybody's following it. You would have to have some kind of regional meeting where you bring all the managers into one store, you roll out how you do it. And then once you get that all done, then they go back to the stores and do it. And then corporate's going to, but 6 months later, go and tour all the restaurants and make sure the changes have been made complete. And you're going, wow, $1 million so that we could say we're no
Okay,
longer
so
doing
in
this.
the little example I threw out there, if we're cutting it down to 5 ounces of pork instead of six because the price of pork went through the roof, but we want to maintain our menu prices, we want to put collard greens on instead of
Mm-hmm.
green beans, we want to change the starch to be rice instead of French fries. That would be a whole menu update, printed materials, promotional program, educating everybody because the chit that the cook is going to see is still going to say pork plate or
Pork plate.
or
Yep.
POBC or whatever the code is, right? And then
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
so rather than do that, you have a much more the training is baked in, and you send out an alert going, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we updated the pork plate. Pay attention to the chits because I got to imagine over time you're like, okay, I've done 1,000 of these. I'm not really, yeah, but
Right.
and then
Right.
but if you get the heads up that check out the pork, we changed the pork plate, check out the chit, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, 5 ounces of pork instead of coleslaw, or instead of French fries, we're putting rice. Instead of green beans, we're putting collard greens.
Right.
And this is how many ounces. It's like boom, the training's
And
done like that, and it's all baked in. That's beautiful.
yeah. And depending on your POS, and it depending on your POS, you can actually put a message on the clock in. So when every
Uh huh.
employee clocks in, before it allows them to hit the clock in button, it pops up a message that says, pork plates have been modified. They no longer have 6 ounces. They now have 5 ounces. Please hit OK to verify that you've received this message. OK, now clock in. You can literally talk to every employee as they clock
Oh,
in.
so the
No manual rollout. No, I don't have to depend on the manager to communicate. I can actually put it on the clock in. So they get a message when they clock in and tells them, read this, hit OK, now clock in. And you can stay on there for a week if you
and
wanted to, or 2 weeks. And they probably hit that thing 10
and they
times as they
they
clocked in.
they have to take an action to verify that
Verify.
they read that, right. It's like, do something, or
Yes.
otherwise they don't start getting, they can't clock in, and you know there's no fun in not
Right.
clocking in.
Right. But we can bake that all in. So now our team members are
Right.
informed. They don't feel uninformed because once again, team members hate feeling lost. I mean, I don't believe anybody shows up to work and says, you know what I want to do today? I want to fail miserably and I want to make everybody mad and I don't want to get the food out and I want to have a horrible shift. Nobody does that. So every tool that you can give them, which goes down to working equipment and good information, and they know what's going on, makes them feel safe and secure in their workplace. And they go, wow, I like working here because I'm informed on what's going on. I know how to
Yeah.
do my
So
job.
now let's continue with our lemon example. So now in Tickle My Barbecue,
Okay.
how does a new you're opening up a new store? Somebody's got to cut the lemons. How do they learn how to cut lemons properly?
Shoulder to shoulder with
Okay,
an opener,
and
a certified opener. So I'll give you an example. So when we opened up Tickle My Ribs
yeah,
and Indian Trail, we went from station to station. We did a 4-day training program for the
right,
entire crew. And then we opened up. But in that 4 days, we literally opened up the restaurant in each position with each team member that would work that position. There weren't 60 people in my restaurant standing around while I'm teaching 4 people how to do lemons. I got 3 people, and that's, they do these
right,
stations at corporate trainings. We didn't do that. We literally went through the opening. Hey, all my opening people will be here on Monday, and we're going to
right,
open up the restaurant. And how do we do that? We pull this out. We do this. My meat guys, I showed them how to open up the meat. My fry guys showed them how to open up fry, and we had everybody in their little microcosms. There was no 20 people following one person around while we
right.
open up the whole restaurant. It was they were doing their position, their opening. That's all they had to learn. And in 4 days, they were proficient at opening the restaurant
Okay,
in their position. The closing the restaurant, the same thing. The guys would come in at their 4 o'clock shift. We would do a simulated 4 o'clock shift transition, and then we would close the
right.
restaurant together. By the time we were done, they were proficient at doing what we were needing to do to open,
Now
transition, and close the
you
restaurant.
mentioned the term certified opener. Are those training
Mm-hmm.
positions in corporate, or is that like somebody that's actually working a restaurant and they have that certification?
They work in a
Okay,
restaurant and they had that certification.
so
So what I try to do is I did combine both kind
right,
of working in corporate. So I did learn a lot about checklists and stuff. So we kept using the word proficient. So we have
right,
proficiencies, and you're checked off when you get hired. There are proficiencies for the
right.
position you are hired for, and you check off every day that you work. The manager signs off on it and says, you did this and this today. And did you do your 4 proficiencies or 3 proficiencies that you had to check off today? And did the manager certify that he did them with you and
Okay,
that you're good? Yes. Boom, done. And once you got all your proficiencies for the position, you are
right,
certified to
right.
work that position. Then there is a training proficiency, which it says that you're so proficient at it, you did all this, and that we certify that you are now allowed to train
Okay,
that
okay.
position.
So you've got
And all it is a
right.
checklist. There's no book, no anything. It's just a checklist that a manager signed off and said, you are hereby trained on how
So
to do it.
because the manager was trained, because just going back to corporate, going to the corporate,
Yes.
somebody trained them and made sure they were proficient, and the proficiency continues, and then
Right.
they're now, I mean, it's interesting because what you hear a lot in franchises is, you train the heck, you're doing, you got a new franchise or franchisee, you train the heck out of the new franchisee owner or managers, and then you go
Mm-hmm.
train the initial set of employees, and then you rely on the franchisee to do train the trainer, but you never actually certify the franchisee as being able to train the people, right? You never
Right.
actually, you're
Right.
just like, okay, it's your store, good luck, go train your people, so it's
Right.
so all of the so as you're growing Tickle My Ribs, it's like all the staff are like, hey, you're in this role, these are the proficiencies, there's a certain level of, or a certain level of, or a proficiency of skill that you have to do your
Mm-hmm.
job and do it well, and you're relying on the manager to
Mm-hmm.
say, yep, this person is an opening server. One of the proficiencies is cutting lemons. They know how to cut lemons, sign off on that. And the other 10 proficiencies they need as an
Right.
opening server, and then add on another 5 as a closing server, and now and a transition server, and now they've got all the proficiencies for all the different server roles, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
you're going beyond that and saying, okay, but now you have to be able to teach it, which is really cool
Right.
because something we don't. We hadn't had that conversation before because so I've been in the learning and development for a little while now, a couple decades, and an interest in for a decade or so before that because I've been around the block a few times. And the most interesting thing to do, which I until you just said that, I don't think I've ever really heard it systematically in a program. And it goes back to something I learned like 30 years ago. It's learn, do, teach, right? If you want to
Mm-hmm.
really understand something, you need to teach it. But first you have to learn it,
Yes.
right? Then you got to do it and do it well, and then you got to teach it. And and it was a learn,
Mm-hmm.
do, teach loop. And if you can teach it to somebody, they're going to ask you questions you never even thought of, right? Yeah, and you become really,
Yeah.
really proficient at it. And so that's really fascinating that down at the associate level where where the rubber meets the road with the customer, you're basically saying, hey, here's the skills you need to be proficient at your job. Here are the skills you can grow into as you expand your responsibilities at the job, right? So there's it's not just the server skills, it's the opening server, transition server, closing server. Same with the back, same with the back, same with the
Mm-hmm.
assistant manager, same with the manager. And so here's this whole set of proficiencies. We have a system by which we're signing off that you're proficient and certified. And it goes back to what we said before. Skill development is all about practice and coaching and then demonstrating proficiency. And you bake that
Right.
in and you pick up the knowledge as you're going along, right? But then the really cool thing, and I didn't know this
Right.
until you just said this, I just think this is really fascinating, is you're going beyond that and saying, okay, now take it up a notch so that you could be a trainer. And then as we open other stores, we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily bring somebody in from corporate who's never worked a store. We're going to give you the opportunity to go to another store and help open as a certified trainer in that skill set, because,
Right.
and now the beautiful thing about that is not only are the new employees at this new store learning from somebody who's been in the trenches, it's like the drill sergeant type thing. It's like you just didn't learn from somebody who's not a soldier. You learn from somebody who's been in the trenches
Right.
and can convey more than just the book knowledge. They can convey all that experience. But then at the same time, the certified trainer is becoming a better server or better cook or better manager because they have to teach what they do to somebody else. And so they're getting a better appreciation
Yes.
and that's just going to go help them when they go back to their stores. That's really cool. That's really flipping cool. That's so cool.
Well, and the company
Yeah,
benefits from
yeah.
it
It's a
because
win-win.
the more the trainers that you have all these aces walking around that are
Yeah,
subject matter experts, and all they're doing is training your future leaders, and it just
yeah.
makes them even
That's
better.
really cool.
And it becomes its own. It starts getting its own momentum. And next thing you have a core group, and so our
Okay.
colors are black and red for Tickle My Ribs, black, red, and white. And so all the team members
Right.
wearing black shirts
Yeah.
and black hats, and it's got the logo on it. When you're certified as a trainer in your area, you get a red hat or a
Okay.
red shirt,
Okay.
and they're identified so you know who to go to in your restaurant. You go find a red hat or a red shirt and say, hey, I need help with this. No problem. I've got it. I can help you with it. So they know who the leaders are. They're identified in the store.
Oh,
And
that's so
and
cool.
it's funny how quick people get, man, I want a red hat. I want a red shirt. I want one of those. And then I even developed these little patches because smoking is a big thing in our,
Right, right, right.
smoking different meats. So in order to be a certified smoke master in each different thing, we got these patches that you can either put on your shirt or on your hat. They're actual patches. So when you get certified on smoking pork, beef, chicken, there are smoke master patches that these guys put on their
Yeah,
hats,
yeah, yeah,
like the old pins, and they get these
yeah,
they're
yeah,
like
yeah.
badges of honor. And then when you learn how to do all of them, and you're certified to teach all of them, you get a smoke
Right.
master pin that goes on your hat, and it says anything over here, I'm a master of it. I can show you how to do it because I've done it all. And Sean has come in and hereby certified me as a black
Yeah.
belt of of smoking. And it's like the thing like, oh man, that guy's a smoke master.
Well, the
He's done it
brilliant,
all,
that's
you
so
know.
brilliant.
So you
That's so
set
brilliant
an
because
achievement.
a lot of times the reward and incentives are, you know, when we look at training programs, we also, and we talk to our clients about them, we're also like, well, what's the reward and incentive? Like, why? Like, like part of
Mm-hmm.
the why is what we talked about before, but that's more at the owner manager level, right? Like, I do this. We're going to spend $1 on
Right.
training. We're going to get $2 more in revenue. We're going to increase our margins by 2% or what. But the frontline person doesn't. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they care about that because they want their company to thrive and they want to continue to be employed. But it doesn't. It doesn't hit the emotional side. So we always talk about, well, what's the incentive? What's the reward? Why should they do this? Right? What are you doing to reward them? And usually
Mm-hmm.
it's an afterthought. And it might be you get a certificate or something. But what I love about what you just said is it's actually the garment you're wearing while you're on the job, right? And it's like, you
Yes.
could just see, I could just imagine in the store, it's like, I want a red shirt, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm surrounded by red shirts. Me and Marty are the only black shirts. I gotta get my red shirt.
Yeah.
And I can also imagine just the peer pressure, but in a positive way of, hey Jeff, come on, you can get,
Mm-hmm.
you just got these cool two other, let me help you with develop these skills so you can get your red shirt, right? And then you go beyond that by saying, okay,
Right.
now I get into the mastery, right? And now let me have other
Mm-hmm.
visual cues to people at the store. The customer may not be aware of it, but visual cues to people in the store as this person has this level of mastery in this. I think that's just absolutely brilliant. Just brilliant.
Well, well, I tell you what, with the kids, and we talked about this. Everybody's talking about how hard it is to find team members, how hard it is to find this, and how hard it is to keep them and stuff. What's one of the most addictive things that
Right.
kids do
Right.
today are video games,
Yeah.
right? And how do they
Yeah.
get
You're leveling
addicted to
up.
it? Levels,
Level.
leveling up. And that's what I'm doing. I'm a leveling you up. And oh man, how do I get that sticker? How do I get this? I mean, the dumbest things like a little emblem on a gun, playing Call of Duty. Like I had to do like these 20 different things to get an emblem, that doesn't give me any money, doesn't do anything for me in the game. But I would just notice these guys would go crazy
Yeah.
just trying to get some new emblem. And I'm like, well, how do I bake that into my group and get these kids incentivized?
Oh
Man, when
yeah.
those patches came out, everybody wanted to know, whoa, how do I get those? That's awesome. I want that. I want this. And it was just that mentality. And I've got 17-year-olds that I swear have gone for more certifications than in my entire
Yeah.
career that I've seen
Yeah.
25
Well,
go for.
because when you talk about rewards and incentives, people just naturally gravitate towards money, right? Like you just assume money, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna have to give you a nickel, or I'm gonna, you do
Right.
that and you get a buck, or you get a gift certificate, or or you get points to go
Right.
buy stuff in a store. Like I'd say those are the most common. When you get beyond the here's a certificate of completion, which is, I'm not knocking that. It's a good base level thing to do, right? Like let's recognize the fact that you accomplished this, and give you some type of recognition. But beyond that, you see
Right.
a lot of, well, we're either going to give you a monetary incentive or we're going to give you points, and then you can go to this this store and spend your points on whatever it is. There's like the credit card companies, right? Like you can go buy gift certificates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And those are, I mean, I've seen those be very motivating, and they work very well. But the thing you're touching on that those don't touch on, which is and just it brilliant, just brilliant. This is why I love talking to you. I learned so much when I talk to you. I'm gonna, but what that doesn't do
But
is it doesn't give you social status. And
right. And long term effect, the
right,
long term
yeah,
incentive.
exactly,
Because I believe that the financial stuff is short term. Oh man, I worked hard. I got my credit card. I went on the company website and I bought my two
right.
sweatshirts. It's over.
And there's no
It's over. There's no more pat on the backs. No more. I joke around. You no longer get saluted as an officer anymore. You're that guy. But if I get to show up to work every
yeah,
day with clout, I'm not as quick to jump ship because I've got to start over somewhere else. I'm a captain of the ship over here. I mean, when I walk through, people part ways because I'm a red hat in a red shirt with my emblems. I get respect here. All of a sudden, I don't want to
well,
jump ship for 50
exactly.
cents more an hour because
Well,
I'm
that's what I mean by
respected
social
here. You
status,
know?
right? Like, like the problem
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
money and the points and things like that is it's all private. It's like I might have, you
yeah,
know, 10,000 points in my little bank because I did X, Y, and Z. You might have 100,000, but I don't know that. We're just coworkers, right?
yeah.
And maybe I bought the sweatshirt at the company store and spent 5,000 points on that, and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Where'd you get that? And I tell you, but there's no, but
Right.
you know, social status is a very big motivator. It's part of
Yes.
the human condition. We actually have biological
Hmm.
systems in our bodies, in our brains that are continually evaluating your social status in any group, and you have physiological changes that occur based on how you perceive your status in a given group. But that's a whole other
Hmm.
thing. But I only bring that up to say it is a very deeply rooted thing of us as humans. It's biological. And what I love what you just did is you tapped into that to make the reward a social status thing, but also it's also, and you didn't sit there to do it for social status, but then it's also a helpful thing to go like, hey, I need to talk to somebody about X. I can visually see that this person knows
Hmm.
X, right? Because they've got the red shirt, they've got the patch,
Hmm.
so I got, I'm having, I'm smoking the chicken. It's not smoking right. And, oh, I go over here and talk to this guy. He's got the chicken smoker, right? Patch. And he's like, oh, you forgot to put this
Yeah.
on, or you did this too early, or whatever it is it did. So there's a very, there's a very practical component to it in that it's like, hey, when you need help, who do you go? Boom, 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 boom. But there's also a social component to it. And to your point about the video games, well, that's why kids love, that's why people level up, right? It's like, I don't want to get,
Yeah.
I don't really care about those 5 electrons that make my sight purple or whatever, whatever the designator is. What I want is the people I'm playing
Right.
with to see that I have the purple scope, because the purple scope means something.
Yes.
And it's a signal to them
Yes.
that I've achieved a certain level of skill and proficiency at this particular task. And so it gives me social
Yeah.
status. I don't really care that my scope is purple. I care that everybody knows what
Right.
that means, like you said. And wow, that's
Yeah.
brilliant. That's actually brilliant. You might have thought about this once for a minute
Yeah.
or two.
Yeah. A little bit. A little bit. Well, with corporate, I just got tired of where we were turning over some of the trainers and keeping people in the training development
Yeah.
program was tough. And I noticed that because like you said, everything was private. Even the meetings were private. It was like, shh, don't tell me about it. We have a trainer meeting next week. We're all going to go over here. We're going to, and I'm like, dude, shout it from the rooftops. Let these people know that these
Right.
guys are the leaders of our company. Let them, and there's always been a mystique about being a
Right.
manager
Right.
in any company, right? It's like we wave the magic wand and now you are a manager. Wow, you're somebody.
Right.
Well,
Right.
what made them a somebody? Somebody needs to, and there's even a thing in restaurant business that we don't promote within and keep them in the same store. Do you know why? Because there's no mystique. They know this guy from his DNA. So when he becomes a
Right. Right.
manager, they're like, oh, that's just Ralph. Yeah, and we worked around for years. So we have to take him to a new store to give him that mystique of he's a manager and he's gone through some kind of, worldwide transition that's made
Right.
him now he's all knowing and it gives him more respect. But so what I try to do is I try to give that respect to the hourly team members. And it's just amazing on watch their work performance. I wish there was a study that we could do and do this with a company
Right.
and change over all this stuff and then watch their work performance and company loyalty change
Yeah.
as you bump their status up. I bet it
Well,
would
I tell you,
be
I think
insane.
as you go forward with Tickle My Ribs, um, I think you're going to see it because like I'm going back to that survey from the show. It's like number one, I mean, retail, especially restaurant retail, very high turnover business, right? One of the top reasons people
Mm-hmm.
leave in the first 30 days is nobody trained them. And one of the top reasons they leave in the first year is they realize nobody else is trained. And then they're like, I got to get out of here, right? And I bet you guys, as you grow and that you're just going to be a case study because I mean I've seen it in my own business at Latitude. Yeah, we have very low turnover, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not just training; it's a whole myriad of things. But the impact low turnover has on your business is amazing. The institutional knowledge that
Yes.
the staff has, you could just do things that other companies just can't do. And it's not just that it adds a dollar or two to the bottom line. I mean, it does it will, like so,
It
make no bones
does.
about it. It adds money to the bottom line if you can get your turnover down. And the other thing is
Yeah.
it makes the place such a more enjoyable place to work in. It just really is. Just on a side note, just talking about turnover, this is really interesting because it had, and you notice this at corporate. Um, one of my larger clients, one of the automotives up here in Detroit, um, we were working with their dealer training program, right? And then they got about at the time they had about 2,500 franchises around the world, and about 250,000 franchise employees or dealer employees, right? And a dealership has a 50% turnover a year, 50%, huge.
Okay.
And we were rolling out this
Mm-hmm.
training program for these guys, and they were doing it right. They had baseline, they knew a trained salesperson sold twice as many vehicles as an untrained, trained being certified as an untrained. Certified tech had a fixed first visit score that was, 15 points higher than an uncertified, like they that whole dollar of training, they knew that it generated like $3, $4 of benefit, right? And so we're rolling this out, but
Mm-hmm.
we're rolling this out. But here's a really cool thing: when we put our system in place, a dealership had a 50% turnover, and the conventional wisdom at this organization, at this company, was we're training our competition because there's such a high turnover at the dealerships. They're going to a more prestigious brand, right? That was the conventional wisdom. And we rolled our system
Mm-hmm.
out and we put it in place. And one of the things about our system is it tracks people as they move around different locations and they keep their ID. Anyway, long story short, this goes back. Well, it turned out when we rolled everything out, a dealership had a 50% turnover, but the network had less than a 10% turnover. And what was really happening
Wow.
was people weren't leaving the dealership and going to another competitor's brand that was more prestigious. Is people were getting trained and going to other dealers within the network that valued the training. And to your point about not leaving the network, it became I'm a certified this at this level that has value within this community, not just within my store, but within this
Mm-hmm.
community. And it blew everybody away. Not at this, and this is a
Mm-hmm.
big freaking company, right? Global company. Went all the way
Right.
up to the C suite, that we are not training the competition. we've got, a dollar of training generates X dollars of benefit, and people are trading up within the network. That's what's happening. And so, I'm listening to what you're saying. It just reminded me of that, of the value, the lower retention, not just within the store. You've got that, but then within the network, because as you build, it's like, well, who's going to value the master smoker patch the most? Another franchise of
Right.
Tickle My Ribs barbecue. And so,
Right.
anyway, it's just really, I think
Yeah.
as a franchisor, it's you want to focus on the retention within the store, but then a larger retention within the network as well. And it's just fascinating. But that's really cool. I'm sorry, I got all giddy and
Well,
excited about that.
that's right. That's right. Well, when you were talking about turnover, though, I was always suspect of restaurants when they would
Yeah,
brag about their onboarding process. And here's the reason. I'm like, so you guys focus so much on your onboarding and all these big training programs and all this. How bad is your turnover? If if you're onboarding and hiring so many
right.
people within the same unit, I've got to ask, has anybody done a deep dive and figured out why you guys have become such masters of onboarding and training people in this one restaurant? Because to me, a point of bragging would be,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
people don't leave our restaurant. I mean, there's like a
Yeah.
waiting list to work here. Um, we don't. Our onboarding is, in fact, we had to dust off the onboarding book because we haven't
Yeah,
onboarded
that's
somebody in a
success.
year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an impressive program to me. But when you're updating your onboarding on a monthly basis and you've got a training group just working on your onboarding materials and you're ordering all this swag and t-shirts and all this stuff because you're onboarding so many people, to me, that would be a huge red flag indicator. I'd go, oh, if I was sitting in that boardroom and they were rolling out this new onboarding every other
Yeah.
month, I'd go, hey, time out. Time out. Let's figure out why we're onboarding so many people instead of why are we not promoting more people? And that brings the other thing that if you have a training program where
Right.
people are working shoulder to shoulder and they're practicing skill sets with people instead of just giving them a book, a checklist, and saying, "Hey, get this checked off. Come see me later," and it becomes you're more of a burden
Right.
than you are my coworker. I think that we end up in a situation where we're spending a lot of money on people
Right.
that, like you said, just end up leaving. And I'm like, but if we have a program to drill down on why are people leaving, but hey, I'm going to help you get promoted. You're going to go here and you're going to have this kind of rank and you're going to have this. And we really want to move forward. People don't leave because they've worked a bond out with the person that actually trained them. Hey, man,
Right.
we're red
Exactly.
shirts together now, or we're red hats together, or hey, we're smoke masters. And then you got to put it. Then you have to put this in your culture is when the regional director comes in the restaurant, who's the first person he says hey to? So I did this when I was the head of operations for the two franchise groups. It drove everybody crazy. When I walked in, there would always be an HR director there. Oh, Sean's coming in. There's a VP of ops, or everybody would show, hey, Sean's coming in to do an inspection or whatever. I would walk right past everybody, and I walked right to the dishwasher. Every time I went to a restaurant, went right to the dishwasher and say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" "Good." "Hey, I'm Sean. It's nice to meet you." He goes, "Hey, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Good." "Hey, so what's going on back here?" Because I'm like, you can't have
Right.
a clean
Right.
restaurant if you have a dirty dish area, right? And what do we call them? Dish pits and all this stuff. I'm like, no, this is a dish area. Like, you're my safety sanitation specialist. I want to say hey to you and see what's going on and how I can help you. And I took that mentality with the red shirts and stuff. When we're only two restaurants right now. We're hoping to build into big things, but I want that culture to expand to, hey, if you own your own franchise group, the first people that need to get your handshake when you walk in a
Right.
restaurant are your red shirts and red hats. Those are your subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Those are the guys running your restaurant. And you create that cloud. And hey, when you have a business convention, you have anything, the red shirts are invited. Those people need to be the people that get the
Right.
handshakes and get the data boys. And and I want that to be the culture of, hey, you're a subject matter expert in my company. I want you to be my conduit of information. But what we do is in corporate, they surround themselves with VP of ops and directors of operations that come in and give this fluffy view of all this stuff, and a training director and all this stuff, but
Right.
nobody that actually has gone through the program. And now you've identified who those guys are, bring them to the board meeting and say, hey, we're going to roll this out.
Right.
What do you
Well,
think?
I mean, that's what I love about
Tear it apart.
training certification and yeah, and going beyond just you're proficient enough for the job. Now you're proficient enough to teach the job. And when we open up a new station, we're going to bring in a certified
Right.
trainer who's not sitting in corporate as a cert, but is working. I mean, that's just brilliant. One other point I want to make that I really love about what you're doing, and it's conversations I had at the IFA show with some folks, is as a franchisor, you work really hard developing your concept, right? And getting it just so that the consumer loves what you do, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to training, it's all about creating that culture and that proficiency. And then when most franchisors, especially when they're in the emerging stage, developmental stage, they kind of outsource that to whoever the new franchisee is, right? Like I'll train you, and then you train your people. And I'm like, look, you worked really hard to build this concept,
Mm-hmm.
and you worked through all the details, and now you're going to let somebody else train the front line that is the representative of your brand to your customer. I'm like, I mean, I know they're part
Right.
of the team, but don't you want to connect to those frontline folks directly? Like you were just saying, like bring those folks into the boardroom. And one of the things that I really loved about your embedded training
Mm-hmm.
system with, we talked about the chit system and using the POS and when you're clocking in. And I think and I meant to mention this before, but I think it's something that a lot of franchisors don't think about, is it gives you as the franchisor a pipeline of communication and training directly to the people that are impacting the customer. And therefore that allows
Yes.
you to create a more consistent brand, more consistent delivery, a more consistent culture across all the different locations as you grow. And so I just wanted to bring that up before we wrapped up, is
Yeah.
you know um, I think that's one of the real benefits of really getting that type of training program, ongoing training program, out to the franchise employee, is it gives you that direct line. You're not going through the management team or through the layers of
Mm-hmm.
management, especially as you grow and you have franchise groups that own 60 restaurants, right? It's like you're touching. I mean, you are
Right.
literally in what you've done, you're touching every single cook, every single associate directly to say, this is what's changed. Are you aware of it? Yes, I am. Clock in. This is what's changed. There's now X
Right.
ounces, there's 5 ounces of pork instead of six, or we increased, or pork is cheap. We're putting 8 ounces of pork on it for the summer, because now price of pork is down, and we're just going to give them big freaking helpings for the next 6 months, right? Like whatever it is, you're touching them
Yeah.
directly, and it's really really cool.
Yeah. Well, we didn't even talk about the front house guys. I mean, it's the same thing. So when we
Right.
mapped out how they ring in orders, it forces them
Mm-hmm.
to ring it in a certain way. You pork plate, do you want one or two sides? Two sides. And the questions are right there. There's no, oh, hold on.
Yeah.
And you've sat in front of those guys before, right? Yeah, and there's a guy standing behind them going, I'm sorry,
Right.
guys.
Right.
Give them a second. They're training. I'm training them. And I'm always thinking to myself, well, if you're training them, why are you letting them fail in front of me?
Right. Right.
That's not training. That's embarrassing. I've never understood. I'm like, how good do you think this person feels about themselves when they're going, hold on, I'm sorry, I'm trained. I'm like, no, you never let a person fail while you're training them. I don't understand. Same thing with the manager thing. I was telling you, I do the orders with the managers until they're proficient enough to do it by themselves, but we're both doing orders. I
Right.
submit mine until theirs is worth submitting. I cannot stand when I would call a restaurant and go, hey guys, why did you guys spend this amount? Oh, I'm sorry. Steve was training on ordering, he messed it up. And then they act like that's the excuse. And I go, well, wait a minute. Were you training them how to do it, or did
Right.
you just give them the order guide and say go do an order? Because that's also the gap that I'm talking about. Because my training program doesn't allow the failure inside the training program, because the point is to stop them from failing, because you're right beside them and you catch the mistake before it's submitted. But we use that as an excuse in corporate all the time, going, man, why did they screw this up? Or why did they order this amount of food? Or why
Right.
did this happen? And they go, oh, well, so and so was training. I've never accepted that as an answer for any kind of failure, because I'm like, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me we had two people doing the job and it
Right.
didn't get done right? So we had a certified trainer and someone else, and we still failed. And that's something we got to deep dive into, because I
Well,
don't want people feeling like failures.
I think
I
that
want
goes
them to
back to
feel
the
like a
whole
trainee.
your whole philosophy, which is a skill development philosophy versus a knowledge acquisition philosophy, right? If the whole philosophy of your
Mm-hmm.
training program is knowledge acquisition, and the example I always use is getting your driver's license, right? You got to pass the written test, and then you have to pass the road test.
Mm-hmm.
And the written test is all about knowledge acquisition. What does the red octagonal sign on the side of the road mean, right? Like, what does these yellow stripes in the middle of the road
Right,
mean? That's knowledge acquisition. Oh, that's a stop sign. I
right,
shouldn't go across the yellow line. Now I know that. And you do that and you pass your written test. And then you have to learn how to drive, the skill of driving. And that's where
right,
you and somebody that, whether you're, you know, a lot of times, a parent or an older sibling or somebody, you're in a parking lot, you're driving around, you're setting up cones, you're parallel
mm-hmm.
parking, you're practicing and you're getting coached. And that's and then you pass your road test, which is can you pull out onto the
Right,
highway safely? Can you parallel park? Can you operate a vehicle
right,
safely on public streets? It's basically what they're doing. Do you have that skill? And to your
right,
point, that's the difference between a knowledge acquisition. They're just getting them ready to pass the the driver's test, the written test, right? And then they're saying, okay, he's out on the
right.
road learning how to drive. It's I'm sorry he crashed that car. He's learning how to drive.
Right, right.
and you're and
And
you're like you're like,
I've never understood it,
no, I
but
want
we
them to
do it.
be able to have the skill set to operate a vehicle safely before I let them out on their own so they
Right,
don't crash the car.
right.
Right.
Or
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a self-driving car to help him. I mean, and that's what I'm creating. I'm creating a self-driving POS going, all right, so I hit this button, I hit that. I can't fail because it's not going to allow me to hit a wrong button. I'm going to ask the question and I'm going to do it. And the trainer's like, now remember, do this.
Yeah.
But it's a smooth learning experience. And I don't understand. And look, maybe it's a human nature. You would know that better than me, especially with all the studies you've done. It's like letting someone fail in business is not like
Right.
being a dad where you let your son fall. In business, you don't want someone to
Yeah.
fail because one, it costs you money. Number two, it makes the person feel like crap. And number three, the customers
Right.
see that going on
Right.
and they think, wow, what a bad company. So your perception is bad. So you get all three of these things that are bad. And I'm going, why are you not presenting this person in the best possible light? And it's the same thing with cooks. We've got to have the training program that requires the trainer to take as much
Yeah.
responsibility and accountability as the person that they're training. They are not an excuse for failure. Oh, well, so and so was training, they messed that up. Oh, well, no, no, you're the trainer. Never let them fail, never let them fall. And next thing you know, they're really proficient at what they do, and we're able to move on. And
Yeah.
guess what?
Well,
That person doesn't want to quit after the end of the day. And I can't remember the study. I think it was done by SMS, but they said that 90% of all team members that are going to quit their job know before they leave from their last shift. So think about that. So they know before they leave the
yeah.
shift that they're on
Well,
now that
it's
they're not coming back.
and that goes back
And
to
we
the
we do it to
retention
ourselves.
that we talked about. Another analogy that came to my mind. I'm just as you were talking was it was a theatrical performance. It's like you got to learn your
Hmm.
lines and then you have to practice them. And you do that all off stage.
Hmm.
Like when you were talking about the,
Yeah. Yeah.
please excuse him, he's training. That's like saying, okay, go learn your lines, and then you're the opener for tonight's show. But it's okay, I'm going to be next to you while you're
Yeah.
performing. And then it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no. You want to learn your lines and practice them off stage. Then when you're, and then when you're on stage,
Hmm.
you're confident and you can do the job and you can do it well. I think that's a pretty
Right.
good place. I have to transition a little. Um, Getting back to you, Sean Morris, training program. I really love talking to you about it. I could talk to you for hours about it. Um, but I know you have time
Yeah.
to do what you got to do other things. So I appreciate all the time you're spending with me,
Yeah.
so I can learn a bit more and more. I've learned a lot, so I'm really appreciating that. Um,
Yeah.
just shifting gears as we wrap up, one of the things I like to ask folks is like, okay, outside of the work thing, what do you like to learn about personally, outside of work? Yeah, outside the professional stuff.
Well,
when you're learning about stuff, what do you like to learn about?
actually, I love learning
Uh huh.
martial arts. I did it with my son. I did it growing up, and I think I baked some of that into my program
Yeah.
because it's all about proficiency. I can tell you how to do a front side kick, but until you've
That
done it
makes
a
a lot
hundred
of
times,
sense
you don't know
now.
how to do it. Giving a guy a black belt who
Right.
doesn't know how to fight is not really a reason to have a black belt. It's just a color. You just went through a testing program. Also love.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
learning something right now. If you want to hear about it, my kids are actually trying to
Yeah.
teach me how to play pickleball, and I didn't even know what it was. I thought they were joking around. I was like, "Are y'all trying to punk me? What's this? What's this thing?"
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty fun. It's low impact, but
Oh,
I was a
me
big
too. Yeah.
racquetball fan. I used to love playing racquetball. Oh God, I love that game. So it kind of got me back to playing like some racquetball. So I'm learning. They're enjoying beating the crap out of me right now. So they better
Yeah.
enjoy it till I learn how to do this. Um, but I'm learning
Oh,
how to play pickleball, and there's some weird rules and all that. But I'm always
yeah,
like
yeah.
doing
Well, the
physical
interesting
stuff.
thing
I
is
like learning physical stuff.
my mom lives down in the villages in Florida, a big retirement community, and like 10 years ago, and she was a big tennis player. My whole life growing up, she was a big tennis player, and
Mm,
she's like, hey, they got and she stopped playing tennis because her body it was rough on her body, and she's like. She moves down there. She's like, "Oh, they got this great game. It's called pickleball." I'm like,
mm,
"Oh, what's pickleball?" She goes, "It's like tennis, but it's like paddleball, but it's low impact and it's great, and I love it." And this is like 10 years ago. I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And then next thing I know, like 5 years ago,
yeah,
like I'm talking to my friends and like, have you heard of this game, pickleball? Oh yeah, my kids are playing it. It's really cool. And they're like, there's
yeah,
Wolverine pickleball here, it just opened up. We got to go there. And we go there and it's like all kids and it's a fun game.
yeah.
It's a really fun game.
It is. And it's quick. I mean, you're playing, it's quick moving. You're not sitting around, and I mean, I enjoy it. They just opened up an indoor pickleball place here, so I'm learning how to play, and I'm actually looking to get my own little pickleball racket, and
Yeah.
just so I can I got to bring the thunder with
And
them. I
on
got
the
to show
martial
them how to
arts,
play.
which style of martial arts do you practice? Mixed MMA?
Well, it's a mixed martial art. Yeah. So
Okay.
my first black belt was Taekwondo, which was compared to what we're doing now, it's like dancing. Um, and then they did a couple other styles that were mixed martial arts, and they gave them different names, like Shotokan and Kunduru and stuff like that. But I've just done several, and the only thing I hate is I've always hated grappling. I'm a pretty big guy, and I get tired of
Uh-huh.
getting wrapped up by these little guys on the ground fighting. So I'm trying to learn ground
Oh,
fighting right now is my focus. It's a very and at my
yeah.
age, it's pretty high impact. So um, I doubt I'm ever going to be that proficient at it starting this late, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to get back into it.
Oh,
So it's
jujitsu.
more
Okay.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu style
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now.
When I
Just
was
trying to learn it.
younger, much younger, never got the black belt, but in college and that, I did karate, Washinryu karate. I always enjoyed it. Always wanted to get back into it. Now that the kids are out of the house and all that, as an older adult, I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
gee, I'd really love to pick that up because I'm also a very physical type of guy. Like I just like to stay physically active, and
Yeah.
that and my kids just recently.
Yeah.
uh, they told me they were going to do this half Ironman, and I stupidly said I'll do it with them, and that's what I'm training. That's what I'm training for right now. I'm learning how weak my body is.
Oh God.
But what would you recommend if since you've done a bunch of different styles as a mature male, if I wanted to get back into martial arts or
Hmm.
something, just I just always really liked the when I was in it, it was just felt good. Not only the physical,
Yeah.
like I love the practice sessions, and but also you're learning a skill that's can be very useful in certain circumstances. There was a
Yeah.
confidence that it instilled. What would you recommend for someone like
Yeah.
me?
Honestly, I would go with jujitsu. It's crazy. I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying. And there's gi
Uh huh.
fighting
Yeah.
with jujitsu, where you wear the gi, and then there's the workout shirt where, and I like the workout shirt. It's a little faster, and I don't get choked out by my gi, by the guys who are already black belts. They'll choke you out with your gi on jujitsu. But I like the non-gi fighting with jujitsu because I believe it's more practical for what's really going on. If you were to get into something, it's a lot more practical. I mean, the freestyle stuff I did with kickboxing and well, the kangaroo was really good. His name was Sean Bradshaw and gave me a lot of skills for fighting. But if you're wanting something to
Yeah.
really get a good physical workout and feel like you've got something that you can take with you, I honestly believe jujitsu is
No,
one of the
I
best
just
styles
I thought
that are
about
out
that, and I
there.
just thought like there's a lot of throws in jiu-jitsu, right?
Well, there are, but
Okay.
there's more stand up fighting than people give it credit for. I mean, and then in grabbing position and then coming in on
Right.
somebody, and then also learn how to do your elbow strikes and stuff like that. There's a lot more to jujitsu than just tossing people around.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think
Okay. Yeah.
jujitsu gets confused with judo.
Yeah.
Judo is more of the tossing and throwing and all that, where jujitsu is more of the grappling aspects and also learn how to get your guys to submit and do chokeouts and do locks and holds and stuff like that. It's fantastic. And I mean, I'm just
Oh, really?
scratching the surface. There's some guys in there. I mean, honestly, I doubt I'll
Yeah.
ever achieve black belt in jujitsu. But just being around these guys and learning stuff, it's unbelievable. I
Interesting.
learn something every
Well,
time I go in there.
thank you.
Every time.
After I'm done with
It's
this
amazing.
training, it's actually something I want to
Yeah.
look into, in the coming months. I just, yeah,
Yeah. Just get ready to get beat up a lot. That's all I
that's
do.
okay.
I joke
Yeah,
around. I
I
go in
don't
there
mind
so I
that.
can just get beat up.
It's just one of those things that I really enjoyed in my youth, as a young man. And then, you got busy
Yeah.
and family and kids and all that. And now as an empty
Oh,
nester,
yeah.
I'm like, I really enjoyed that. And I'd like to get back into it, but I'm a little bit more brittle than I used to be.
Well,
I
you got
will.
to keep me
I
updated.
will.
Tell me what you end up doing.
Hey, before we go,
Right.
is there anything you'd like to say to everybody, or anything else that you'd like to cover that we haven't covered?
No, I think my biggest thing I want to say is I hope everybody takes a different look at the traditional training and realize that there's better ways for us to do it. And and I'm sure there's someone's got a better way than what I'm doing, and to start sharing it so that we can reduce the turnover and start making our team members want to be in the workplace more and
Right.
really start applying it. And let's take egos out of
Yeah,
training
well,
and start
I
making
think
people
that's a
feel
great
good
way
while
to
they're
wrap
training.
up. And I think well, one, thank you so much for your time. I learned a ton, and and to your point, it's one of the reasons why I started the podcast for partner training or extended enterprise learning. Is we don't really have any place to talk about it, and there's just all these great techniques that people are using, like the way you
Mm,
embedded the training. It's and now that I understand your mixed martial arts background, I'm like, oh, okay, this is all start that and Carolina Country Barbecue, like, and what you guys did there. It all starts to make sense to me how you came up with Tickle My Ribs barbecue training approach, and the embedding it, the touching the folks directly, and then I think it was brilliant on the reward and incentive side to actually change the physical uniform that people are wearing behind the counters, or in the restaurant, I should say.
mm,
Because it's like that's a motivator of people. It really is, and it also has the very very
mm.
practical thing of, hey, that's a red shirt. Let's go talk. I need to. I'm a black shirt and I don't know what to do about X. Let me go talk to that red shirt. So those are some, and I think if we
Yeah.
have more dialogues like this with people that are doing these types of training programs with franchises and other types of extended learning things, I think we can kind of tease out all those best practices. And I certainly learned a lot here. So I greatly appreciate your time. It's just been fantastic. So thank you for your time and sharing all that great knowledge that you have and experience. And to everybody out there, I just want to say
Absolutely.
thank you for listening, as always, and catch you around next time. Take care.
Thanks, Jeff.